Okay, my name's Theresa Blackmore, not Monica Smith. I used to be the academic manager at LLE, and now I'm working freelance and doing online tuition and some training. So to begin the webinar today, I'd like to just explain the context and why we decided to go with this particular title. And back in 2016, the British Council did a full inspection of Living Learning English, and whilst there was a lot of praise, just move myself out of the way. There was a little bit of concern that teachers weren't really spending enough time on the spoken skill and giving students, excuse me, the opportunity to practice, to speak freely, and to use the language that was being taught in independent contexts. And from the teaching and learning observations that I've carried out for Living Learning English, it's a common theme that teachers are very good at putting vocabulary in, explaining language, but then in that time where the observer is watching, there's not enough time given for students to use that language. And obviously observation is only a snapshot of what you normally do, but generally the lesson plans didn't give enough of that speaking time. And the steps to take a student from exposure to vocabulary to being able to use that in a task often skipped. So the definition really of successful speaking here today isn't so much quantity as quality, and to do with what comes before that free speaking to be successful. And I'd like to read a quote from Scott Thornbury, who I'm sure many of you have heard of. And that's the idea of practiced control. And he says that practice control is demonstrating progressive control of a skill where the possibility of making mistakes is ever present, but where support is always at hand. So it doesn't have to be perfect. Students have got that time and space and support from you to have a go with the spoken language. And what's really great on a homestay course, on a one-to-one course, on an online course, is that students really want to learn the speaking skill with you. You know, they can study Murphy at home. They're working with you in the kind of UK context, and it's really a gift. Okay, so the first point that I'd like to make today to help with your successful speaking lessons is scaffold and sculpt. And as Jeremy Harmer's pointed out, one-to-one teachers can do the following. Excuse me. So that co-constructing dialogue, building on what they want to say, helping them to say what they need to say, is a really key form of scaffolding. And some definitions I would like to give for scaffolding here are listed. I won't read them out, I shall let you read. Ooh, got two at once. And again, two at once. Noticing there means noticing language, making connections between the things that they already have at their disposal and the things that you add to this. We're going to come to feedback a little later in the webinar. And finally, this idea of independent completion of a task. Okay. So, before we carry on, at this point in the webinar, we did a poll and the teachers were able to vote on different options. But I'd like you to look at the two pictures here. And on the left, we've got some food items. On the right, we've got kind of it's not Where's Wally, but it's a Where's Wally type scenario, a busy, crowded scene in a bookshop. And I'd like you just to think about how you might use these pictures in a speaking lesson at any level. So you can pause the video if you need more time to talk. To think. You might be talking to somebody. So Ideas for the food pictures included countable and uncountable nouns, saying what you like and don't like, in the homestay, talking about food allergies, recipes, cooking, uh, cultural differences around the world. You might talk about taste of food, describing the qualities of the food. It might lead to a role play in a restaurant, for example, or passing food at the table. And the picture on the right, present continuous, what are people doing? Colours, describing people's clothing, appearance, emotions, making mini dialogues, customer service, imagining where the characters have been, what type of books they're buying, lots and lots of things that you can do with these pictures. So, you know, you could make a mini course just working with this picture. I'm not suggesting you do, but the idea is there's more there than what a book or one solitary exercise would encourage you to do. Okay, so that's the working with pictures is the first step for scaffolding students' output, often at lower levels, but not exclusively. I don't show, there we go. The next point is working with patterns. So these next 2 points are from a book by Penny Ur, who I'm sure some of you will have heard of, and my sources are all given at the end, so you can see the book title. And even, you know, really basic level students can speak, perhaps not freely, but successfully, if you give them a basic pattern to work with. So here we've got a comparative form. A horse is bigger than a dog. And students can then substitute this pattern with other adjectives, other nouns. And even though it seems quite mechanical, it gives them that kind of starting point with speaking. Okay, next one. And then working with phrases for interaction in the classroom, even if it's a one-to-one, but especially if it's a two-to-one. Using English in the classroom is really helpful. That kind of meta language, talking about the language itself, asking for repetition, for clarification, asking what you think, what their partner thinks if it's a two-to-one course. And as she calls them, these utterances, these kind of set phrases are readily available and can be added to the student's vocabulary bank. And my third point there, a fourth point, is working with patients. So it takes a long time for students to build up. They have to understand what they're being asked or asked to do, think about it, think what they want to say, think about how to formulate it, and then finally physically formulate it. So don't be afraid to leave space in the speaking classroom. Okay, some more scaffolding exercises. So this one is a very basic series of question prompts with certain words not there for the students to build on. And I used this activity with a 2-to-1 adult course, a pair of French-speaking friends who were very interesting and wanted to know more about each other. They didn't know each other very well, and they needed to be able to ask questions correctly. Questions in English can be quite difficult. Here we've got quite a range of tenses and different types of questions, including yes, no, do you like sport, present perfect, have you ever won? So you could adapt this depending on your student's level and need. But we used it to build up towards them just having a conversation about their hobbies. One of them was a semi-professional singer, the other one had played professional rugby, I think it was. So a really basic starting point, which then developed into them talking more passionately, albeit not always correctly, about their hobbies and their passions. And yeah, as I've said there, you can build up to the students saying these phrases, asking these questions, making a mini dialogue rather than just reading them from the page. And if they're doing a one-to-one, you could send them off. They could talk to somebody in the home. They could go and talk to a neighbour. You know, talk to people online, friends that they have online, practice their English in that way. Okay, role plays. Early in my career, I got a bit not scared, but I didn't enjoy doing role plays because I didn't know how to set them up. So you'd have these pre-prepared cards, you'd give them to student A, student B, and then student A would take the card and say, you are a waiter in a restaurant, ask the customer. So they didn't know what to do either. So it is a matter of learner training, but it needs to be stepped, in stages quite carefully. So these are my suggested stages. Elicit from the student what they want to say, sculpt that, so help them make it into decent English, write it out, practice it, refine that, so it could be pronunciation, it could be getting those question forms correct, excuse me, and then remove the prompt. So one way of doing that is to write out the strips of dialogue on pieces of card. You can cut those up, you can gradually take away the pieces, or you can do it on a whiteboard and rub things out. Practice it, learn it a little bit, perform it, make it into a bit of a drama situation, and then repeat. Do the whole thing again, improve it, change the situation, have similar questions. But, a role play shouldn't just be a quick part of a speaking lesson. It needs to be scaffolded. Okay, another idea. This one is from Jim Scrivener, who with Adrian Underhill has worked on something called the demand high approach, and both of those speakers have been at previous Living Learning English conferences and workshops. And this is slightly adapted from an activity from Jim. So have a look at that. Have a sip of tea. So there's memory involved here, which helps with kind of committing new words, new phrases into that language bank for a longer amount of time. And it also helps students understand how longer phrases work, what they can and what they can't say, which is what this idea of good English is. Okay. And you could take any dialogue situation that you've come across on your course with them, whether it's between the two of you or with a bus driver or whatever it might be. Okay, that's just to mention that there is a handout that I prepared, which is available electronically with the slides for this webinar. And it's got some extra ideas. It's got some links to pronunciation websites. It's got a diagram for pronunciation, which we are going to come to in just a second. Okay, so my next tip for improving your students' output is to play with pronunciation. So you don't need to worry if you don't know the lovely chart. Some teachers know it well, some teachers know a few phonemes, some teachers just go, ah. Often your students are less aware of that than you might expect. So don't worry if you don't know the chart. You are the pronunciation expert. It doesn't matter where you live in the country. Your voice is relevant. You can teach students so much about pronunciation. So don't be scared of it. Do incorporate it into your speaking lessons. Okay? It's more than just copying sounds. It's to do with modeling. So understanding what's happening in your mouth before you're getting your student to do the same thing. And I like to think I've coined the phrase mouth mindfulness. Theresa Blackmore, 2019. So as long as your student is comfortable doing that and you're comfortable doing that, really think about the transitions, the position of the tongue, how wide the teeth are. Think about what happens when you move between certain consonants, vowels. You can use this diagram if it's easier. You can use something from the internet. You can use your hands to show where the tongue and the teeth are. But really kind of engage with it rather than just getting the student to mimic. That's what I've just said. So features of connected speech that students need to kind of know about and that you might be able to raise awareness of include elision, where sounds missing, you and me, so the D is gone. Intrusive sounds, I am, with a Y sound in the middle. Transitions between syllables, weak sounds, especially in contractions, I'm a teacher, and so on and so on. There's plenty of material out there on pronunciation. Oops. Okay. Other things that you can do, replacing the syllables with na, so na, 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 na. So pronunciation would be na, 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 pronunciation. Practicing stress patterns in longer phrases, banging on the table to get the rhythm of words, singing or kind of chanting. Back chaining, which if you don't know what back chaining is, I'll give you an example. It helps with fluency. And I used to do it in my clarinet lessons, actually, which was very confusing. So if your phrase is, I'd love to be better at speaking, back chaining means starting from the end of the phrase. So you'd start with, or the student would start with, speaking, better at speaking, be better at speaking, to be better at speaking, love to be better at speaking, I'd love to be better at speaking. And that just helps to build it up from the end and get those transitions happening. The last point I've put there is, if students get really stuck, don't worry about leaving things until later. Don't allow them to have a block. That said, the French lady from the 2-to-1 I was talking about earlier really didn't think that she could pronounce the h sound. So French, Italian students often miss the H at the beginning and put it somewhere else where it's not needed. And then during the lesson, she took off her glasses to clean them and breathed on them with this h sound. And I said, there you are, you can do it. And the light bulb went on. She didn't realize that she could produce this sound. So do think about kind of finding ways in and making students aware of what they can do. You don't need to get stuck. All right, so here we are looking at some features of connected speech with an English for academic purposes student who I've been teaching online. So higher level student who needs to speak a lot for her work. She writes a lot of papers, but she also gives panels, gives presentations, gives summaries of these papers. She's Italian, but living in Switzerland, and French speaking, German, so she's got everything going on. So this is just one way of working that we developed. So the green sound there is this sound. So we worked with colour to highlight sound spelling relationship or lack of relationship in English. We also worked with the word stress. So you see the capital letters, the uppercase letters indicate the strong syllable, developed, relevant. And she also added her input in terms of this kind of Italian j sound to get the visualize, as you can see there. So that's her annotation of the spelling. It's not a perfect system, but it works really well for her. We worked on shadowing the sentence intonation, so she was kind of rolling the language over her tongue. The way that worked for her was to actually learn quite a lot of the presentations that she had to give and kind of commit that to memory, which wouldn't be my preferred way of working, but she had notes, she knew the content, and she was able to give, you know, presentations at a level above what you might imagine if you were to speak to her just in conversation. The other points there are phrasing. So those backwards apostrophes were to do with where to pause, where to breathe, where to hit the main point of the sentence. And we did all of that online. And then she recorded herself, we listened to it back, and then worked on particular further issues. Okay, focus the feedback. That's my next tip for your speaking lessons. As you notice, I like to use alliteration. So reformulating, where you kind of say what students wanted to say back to them, but with a better version, is really important. It's not always effective straight away. Don't expect it to stick straight away. You may have heard this statistic that you need to meet a word 7 times before you can use it. So imagine with a longer phrase or some new vocabulary or a particular spoken function, it's going to take quite a few times sometimes for that to kind of work with the student. So don't get stuck and keep going over things. You know, take it on if you can. Helping students to make links between the language that they already have in your feedback and where they could be, so that kind of distance between the 2 points, and helping them to make links, and also connecting it to things that have already come up on your course together, or things you might have heard, things you might have read, just really pulling their skills together and helping them to have things to say as well. Important point, don't correct everything, even if the student wants you to, especially if your student has a lot of different things going on. So focus it, maybe one day work on mainly pronunciation, another day work on the past simple, the endings or intonation, particular vowel sound, whatever it might be. Focus it. It can be demoralizing if you try and do everything at once, and that also goes for writing. Okay, and scoop up errors that you perhaps won't be working too much on at once for future use, so you can have, you know, things to come back to, little focus sessions within a longer lesson, kind of mini correction. Okay, and yeah, this links back to the first point of tolerate messy language. So I am guilty of trying to go for complete accuracy and being perfectionist with students. But communication and making yourself understood is just as important, some people would say more important, than doing it correctly. If you think about the mistakes that native speakers make, they're still understood. You know, language is changing, so do tolerate some mess and have fun with it if you can. Make it visual, so your feedback could involve smiley faces, GIFs, those little moving pictures. You might have a traffic light system, some kind of sliding scale of success. I like to use post-it notes, especially online, to kind of wave a post-it note with the sound that I'm anticipating that my student's going to make a mistake with or miss out, like the th sound, for example. Hand signals, facial expressions, helping them to kind of preempt the mistakes, and they will start to self-correct. And finally, there, record the good stuff. It doesn't have to be an audio recording. It could just be, you know, a note on the lesson record or in the report that you write. But really, you know, praise what they're doing well and help them to see the distance traveled, because sometimes they don't realize. Okay, so another few points to make about feedback. So here we've got, oops, come backwards. A couple of examples which I'll talk about in a second. And from the British Council report, I'm wondering if you can finish this sentence here. Prompting what? Okay, the answer, self and peer correction. So we just talked about self-correction, peer correction, obviously relevant on a 2-to-1 course. So you're all very super helpful. Sometimes it's nice to step back a bit and help them on their journey to language awareness. So here we've got some examples of criteria that you can use for spoken tasks, and these are discussed before the student does the task, so they know kind of what they're aiming for. And these include personal checklists, so you can build those up during the course. There might be a particular thing that they get stuck on or something that they want to improve for themselves. So these examples here, I'll just quickly talk about 2-to-1. Repair strategies. So in the 2-to-1 classroom, it often goes student to teacher, teacher to student, student back to teacher. So get those two students talking to each other to avoid that ping pong between you and them, helping them to communicate with each other. What's the answer to number 3? How do you say this? Are you ready? Can I ask you a question? Like we had before with the interactive phrases for the classroom. Okay. So here on the left, we've got a guided fluency task for the same student as before. Actually, she'd been to a conference, and she often, at the beginning of the lessons, would kind of talk fairly loosely, quite, if I may say, rambling in a rambling way. So these points here were to try and focus this kind of general chat and catch up. So here I've called it guided fluency. So I gave her a few minutes to make some notes just on each point, not so much about recording what she did, but just to get some points in there, some examples of the passive, some discourse markers. After that, what was interesting was, and pronunciation there. And then she spoke. We went through the 7 points and talked about what she did well, what she could have done better, and then she, used some smiley faces to evaluate herself. Okay. So that's a guided fluency example. And on the right-hand side, a kind of simple scoring system for 2-to-1 students. So it could be for them giving a talk or presentation about something they like, presenting a poster. And then on the right-hand side, for a communicative task, such as asking for directions if they're out and about on their day trip. So giving reasons there and giving examples for targeting their own feedback to each other is really nice. And to keep it positive, you could use those 3 sentence prompts there at the bottom. And also with the 2-to-1, you've got a slight competitive element, they can learn from each other as well. Okay, now it's your turn to have a think. And on the next page, the next slide, I've got 3 activities, and I'd like you to consider the following. How could you boost the students' output for this task? How could you scaffold the task? So what stages do you need to add before, or possibly after, or even during the task that you see to make it as successful as possible? How can you organise your correction and your feedback? What kind of things might you comment on, and how would you do that? How would you set the students up to succeed? Okay, so when we did the webinar the first time, teachers were sharing ideas on the Q&A. I'll give you a chance to read through. You can pause the video if you need to, and then I can talk about what the teachers came up with, and you can compare notes. And the task is at the bottom of the next slide. So you've got A is an activity to do with talking about cars. B on the right-hand side is a cinema-based activity. And at the bottom, C, something slightly freer, move myself out of the way. Creating a radio advert or a YouTube advert based on an excursion. So there, how could you boost the students' output, scaffold the activity, organise corrective feedback, and set the students up for success? Okay, so pick an activity, pause the video, and then we can compare. Okay, so for activity A, teachers talked about drilling these questions. Scaffolding included pictures of cars, getting pictures from the students' phones, talking about car vocabulary more generally, looking at the answers to the questions before answering them in a natural speaking way, adding questions. Some teachers suggested changing the topic completely. You could go to a car showroom, you could do an imaginary car, you could look at Top Gear, and then they could make it into an interview to talk to other people in the family or other people that they know. Okay, and the cinema speaking, this is from a 2-page spread actually, and as with all 3 things here, you don't need a course book to be able to create this activity, but you need to think about how to work it. You'd be pre-teaching some vocabulary here. You might be looking at film genre. You might introduce the student to some famous UK films or films from different countries, and looking at question intonation, looking at adding information to answers, practicing those phrases, building it up into more of an interview, like a film show. You could interview your student or vice versa. So the tell the class about your partner would be with you, the teacher, or their 2-to-1 partner, or they could go and interview the family. They could find things online, listen to those, take vocabulary from there. If they're a very low level student, this is from an elementary book, you could just focus on those 4 questions and answers, really, really simple, and work on the student's ability to answer them really clearly and coherently and slowly without saying, okay. Build it up, maybe do some back chaining. Okay. And the third one, teachers were talking about the language of advertising, using really good adjectives, vocal delivery for the advert, whether it's on the radio, some of them would video. You would perhaps have a script that you would work from, build that up, take it away. You could have somebody holding up, subtitle cards or kind of prompt cards. In terms of feedback for that one, you would be watching back what they've done, talking about what was really good, what could have been clearer, if the student's happy, posting it somewhere. And in terms of setting students up for success, for all 3 of these, not kind of starting, starting the main part of the activity until the prep work's been done, until the student is happy kind of rolling that language over their tongue. Okay, there's always something that can be improved, even if it's just questions about cars. All right. So, and that was the feedback. So my last tip today, my alliteration again, make it meaningful and memorable. So some of the things that we've already looked at fall into this category, including finding the hook. So it's easier to work with what students come up with, what they like, what they mention, what they've got pictures of on their phone, rather than shoehorn in things that you find in a book or activities that you're told will work. Especially songs. If you want to work with songs, there's lyrics training. The student can come to you with the songs that they like. Or just sing. On the handout, the electronic version of the handout, there's some more ideas there with post-it notes, working with talking about computer gaming, video gaming, and how to kind of build that up into a longer utterance. So find the student's hook, find out what they like. And you've got a gift in the one-to-one, homestay, online, real world examples, things are happening. Draw out these personal examples. I've got one from the homestay here, or 2 I should say. Looking at the third conditional. So in terms of understanding the third conditional, if this has happened to the student, they're going to know what's hypothetical, what's not. It's reflecting on the past, for example. And you can help students expand these. If I'd taken an umbrella, I wouldn't have got so wet, but I didn't, so I got absolutely soaked. Build it up, make it into a longer utterance. It was absolutely pouring. What happened then? Okay. And then my third point there is return to tasks that students enjoy, not only topics. So a lot of course books organised by topic. You might feel that you need to introduce the students to lots of different vocabulary about various things that might not be relevant in the homestay situation. So if there's a particular task that worked well with them, whether it's a role play, whether it's some questions, whether it's talking about something that they've seen, voiceovers. I haven't talked about voiceovers, but you can do that with really simple kind of YouTube cartoon clips. What happened next? What's this character saying? That kind of thing. So return to those tasks rather than feel the need to work through a number of topics, a number of themes, and that will help with making things memorable. Enjoyment makes things memorable. Cognitive engagement makes things memorable. Okay. Oh, and what it says there underneath the grey bar is that preparation is key. There we are. Preparation is key. and repetition helps language stick. So preparation from you as a teacher, but also preparation from the student in readiness to do the task, to perform the task, to get successful with this task. So to summarise, scaffold and sculpt the student's language, play with pronunciation, focus your feedback, and make it meaningful and memorable. And I'd like to finish with a quote from Earl Stevick, who was a humanist educator and a big fan of the communicative approach, and wrote a very good book in 1976 called Memory, Meaning and Methodology. And we're all very supportive, very helpful teachers, and you want to get the best out of your students, which sometimes, especially in an observation setting, means that you do a bit too much. So just to finish with this quote, most of us would do well to step further aside and sooner and more often than we are accustomed to doing. So have a think about that. So your role is to support the students in some of the ways that I've shown you today, get them ready, and then step aside and see what happens. Hopefully there will be some more successful speaking. So I will just show you there that there are my sources, the links, the books, the PDF of the handout will be available to you as well. And if you have any questions, you can email Living Learning English. You can contact me via my website if you would like to. You can start a thread on the Living Learning English Teacher Forum. And yeah, I hope that today you've found some food for thought. You've got some ideas that you could take into the next lesson. And I hope it's been enjoyable for you. So thank you very much for your time. And whenever you access this in the future, happy watching. Thank you so much.